The Disney Channel original movie, Lemonade Mouth. 5 strangers. One fateful day. The beginning.
I don't want to be some random face in a yearbook. I want to be heard.
Lemonade Mouth.
Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to the DCOM review. This video officially makes it 50 total, so we're pulling out all the stops and jumping into one of the most popular DCOMs of all time. Back in 2011, this movie came out of nowhere to take over the world for a little bit, but is it worthy of its praise? We'll get into that and so much more, so buckle up, because it's finally time to review Lemonade Mouth. Spoiler warning now, for those of you who have yet to see the film, since we'll be talking tons of details. But if you want to go in fresh, you know what to do. With all that said, let's dive right in. Lemonade Mouth begins with an intriguing start right off the bat. There's a bit of narration going on in the background, courtesy of Bridget Mendler, but it starts us off near the end of the movie, when the band is already on top of the world. You don't really see many of the characters in great detail. We see parts of their preparation, their makeup, and setting up their instruments. It's subtle, but why does it work? Because the whole point is to then immediately transition into detention to signify the humble and somewhat improbable beginnings for the band in question. You only see bits and pieces of the characters when they've already made it, because the idea is to properly introduce them at a point when they're still just 5 regular high school kids trying to find their way. And this level of detail is present in just the opening few minutes. Once we're in detention, we get real introductions to the lead characters. Stella, portrayed by the ever-fierce Hayley Kiyoko, Wen, portrayed by Zeke and Luther star Adam Hicks, Mo, portrayed by Disney newcomer and future Pink Power Ranger Naomi Scott, Charlie, portrayed by Dog with a Blog co-star Blake Michael, and of course, Olivia, portrayed by Good Luck Charlie star Bridget Mendler. We know that they are all in detention, but we still don't know why, so the movie skips back even further to tell the rest of the story. The reason this film pacing makes sense is because of the frame in which they choose to tell the story. It's clear that Olivia, the one doing the narration, is telling the story to someone. Therefore, it's reasonable for her to jump a bit from one time to another in the context of the narration. So, how do they all get to detention? Long story short, Mo gets caught skipping school, Wen accidentally calls his teacher stupid, Charlie chucks a ball at the soccer coach, Stella causes an uproar at the school assembly by refusing to be silenced, and Olivia was caught reading alone in the janitor's closet of all places. When Stella makes her way to detention, the overarching conflict in this movie is quickly realized. Nearly all the creative arts or non-sports related activities have been subjected to the basement thanks to Principal Brennigan. While Miss Resnick, the adorably sassy music teacher, is away, the main cast fool around with a couple beats and sounds before putting on a full-scale performance. Some might argue about the legitimacy of essentially creating a song out of thin air, but I would argue that that's kind of the point. Plus, all the characters are musically trained, and as a piano player myself, I can assure you that once you hear a certain key, beat, or chord progression, improvising is difficult but certainly nowhere near impossible. Turn Up the Music is a pretty great track to kick off the musical aspect of the film, and listening to its lyrics such as The Future is Unclear makes for a perfect setup song into later tracks, because again, this is the first song when things are still getting set up, so everything about it makes sense in addition to it being fun. Once Miss Resnick hears them perform, she suggests that they play in Rising Star, the local music competition where the winner gets a record deal. Nobody is really on board with the idea despite the unique synergy they all seem to share when jamming out. But after a less than pleasant family dinner, Stella decides that she can and will start a revolution and texts everyone else about coming together to potentially make this thing happen. So they decide over pizza through the magic of, what else, a coin flip, and stage their very first practice. Things don't go well while they try to recreate the musical magic they had back in detention, but eventually, when it seems like everything's falling apart before anything is actually built, they come together to sing Somebody, which serves as another great track for detailing where the band is now and where they're going. Currently, music is not given top billing at their school, and the individuals who make up Lemonade Mouth are striving to become something more, striving to literally be somebody else. In the aftermath of that, we get our introduction to Mudslide Crush, the competing band featuring Scott, Mo's current boyfriend, and Douchebag of the Year Ray, who's actually portrayed by Doug Brochu's older brother Chris. Mudslide Crush has 2 songs in this movie that are arguably the worst, but in a genius way, that's exactly the point. I'll get into those details later. The next day, there's a confrontation between the popular kids and the members of the main cast. Lemonade Mouth got its name from Stella literally spitting lemonade on Ray, and Ray referring to her as Lemonade Mouth. Now, keep that in mind for when we break down the characters, because I think that's another important detail that this movie really gets right. Next comes a really touching, if not at times awkward, scene between Olivia and Wen, as they start working on Determinate, which for many is the penultimate song in this movie. All this leads up to the Halloween bash, where after some much needed coaxing by Wen, Olivia finally comes out of her shell to hit the stage, where she proceeds to knock it out of the park. Determinate works well as a power track and the most intricate track the band has created so far, which makes sense. Their previous songs were both written by Olivia, so they were pretty simple in construct, but Olivia and Wen wrote this song together, so now we've got a lot of interesting progressions going on here, and honestly, a really well performed rap by Wen himself. Naturally, the crowd can't get enough until the band starts to get political and uses their platform to speak out against the oppression that the school has shown towards the extracurricular activities that don't come with a varsity jacket. Brannigan shuts them down and decides to ban Lemonade Mouth from performing on school grounds, but unbeknownst to them at the time is the revolution that they were starting within their own school, and even beyond. It was then clear to the members of the band that they stood for something so much larger than themselves. Being banned from school didn't perturb them for long, as they found themselves a regular gig at the local pizza place where they performed She's So Gone, a song about and vocally led by Mo, who within the context of the story is slowly realizing that Lemonade Mouth and the new friends that she's made are changing her, and all that pent-up frustration with trying and failing to be her dad's idea of the perfect Indian girl is fully unleashed in this high-energy track. Lemonade Mouth was at its peak, but we've all seen enough movies to know that just like roller coasters, what comes up must come down. The band doesn't see Olivia at school for a bit, so they go over to her place and realize that her cat recently passed. This might not sound like such a traumatic event for some, but even if you aren't crazy about cats, this scene hits home because the cat represented the last piece of Olivia's mother, who passed away some time ago, which leads to the reveal that Olivia's dad is in prison and their relationship is shaky at best. With the song More Than a Band, we get a lighter, more emotional side of Lemonade Mouth, as well as a couple strange editing gaffes where you can see some of the people holding up the sound sticks. It also gave the band an opportunity to slow the pace down and reflect on themselves and their own personal demons, most of which they've been able to ignore for a bit while their music was taking off. It was a really smart choice to bring the quick pace that defined the rise of the band to a screeching halt, because it brings us back to Lemonade Mouth as people. They were able to clear that emotional hurdle together, and, a little later on, they hear Determinate playing on the radio. We just got an emotional downturn leading up to another high for the band. This is an important detail because most movies would have just stacked the heavy moments on top of each other to represent a complete fall, but this movie paces it out. Yes, the band is dealing with their own problems right now, but the rest of the world is still listening to their music, so it makes sense to mix both the band's highs and lows as we get into the final third of the film. But then, things start to go very, very wrong. Mo is starting to get sick before Ray ruins the pizza place performance. Immediately preceding that debacle, Charlie finally tells Mo how he feels about her. He gets friend-zoned and doesn't take it too well. Charlie eventually breaks his fingers after an angry drum session. Wen gets a black eye after his dad asked him to be his best man, and Olivia loses her voice after arguing with Wen about that very topic. It's all pretty downhill for our heroes, but it doesn't stop there, as Mel's organic lemonade machine is being removed currently, and Stella calls the band over to help stop it. They hit rock bottom as the police come to break up the altercation that results. In the aftermath of being placed in a holding cell, the band continues to argue about whether or not they should do Rising Star in their condition. Eventually, they engage in another impromptu musical bonding moment before agreeing to give it a go. Once their parents come to pick them all up, the individual character arcs can finally be resolved. Wen comes to terms with his soon-to-be stepmother. Mo finally confronts her father about trusting her to be who she is and not who he wants her to be. Stella's mother tells Stella how she really feels about her, and Charlie talks with his brother about talking with his parents. So the band performs at Rising Star after Mudslide Crush, but with their multitude of injuries, they struggle. It's a pretty messy collapse, but the scene is another great one because of one element: timing. The band is clearly struggling, and Scott is contemplating whether or not to help them, but then the film is patient. It waits until a few seconds after everyone has completely lost the will to perform before initiating the chain of onlookers who rise to the aid of our heroes by singing as an audience. The musical collapse was perfectly executed, and the resolution it received was a fitting one, since most of the people that sung along were the same people that Lemonade Mouth gave a voice to with their music. It's those people, along with their parents, who are now giving Lemonade Mouth a voice when they aren't able to sing themselves. So they obviously don't win Rising Star, since the audience aren't officially Lemonade Mouth members, but it's the impact they had on the people that matters most. So everyone eventually ends up with a happy resolution, including Stella meeting Mel, the owner of their signature lemonade drink, and through him, creating a brand new theater for the arts. I will say that actually meeting Mel does bring the story full circle, but the whole setup suffers a little bit from plot convenience. But this movie is inherently about people coming together, no matter how unlikely, to make their mark on the world, so it does kind of fit with the broader theme of the film. Eventually, This leads to the band performing Breakthrough at Madison Square Garden, but not before Olivia mails off the entire story that she narrated to her dad, who we found out earlier was in prison. That moment was a great way to cap off Olivia's character arc, because her problems weren't the ones that could be solved after getting released from that holding cell. And with that, we cap off Lemonade Mouth with a large electrifying performance. There is a bit after the credits where they're all getting interviewed before performing Highwire, but that's just for fun, so nothing too analytical going on there. And now, the characters. Let's start with Ray and Scott from Mudslide Crush. Not too much to say about Ray. He's your typical antagonist dick who goes out of his way to create problems for people, but Scott is a bit more interesting in his development. Notice that at the beginning of the movie, he isn't really too far removed from the prototypical overprivileged popular student, and it's that mindset that eventually gets him in trouble with Mo as their relationship starts to deteriorate. But in the aftermath of Mo breaking up with him, he gradually and subtly makes changes within himself to be the kind of person that's worthy of being with the new Mo that she's becoming. It would have been so easy to make him into this clueless popular guy who never really changes his ways and loses the girl to the nicer guy. But Scott actually learns, changes, and grows in response to all this, and eventually, Scott and Mo end up back together as a direct result. It's a great bit of character progression on the side of Scott, and his usually pretty chill disposition works well too. Principal Brennigan is an interesting character because he's an antagonist who's not necessarily in the wrong in the way that, for example, the principals from Minutemen or Radio Rebel were. He needs to run his school in a certain heavy-handed way to ensure that it's well funded in the domain of education, where budget cuts are a yearly occurrence. But it's made clear that he wasn't always like this. At the Halloween bash, he's wearing a Napoleon costume, which shouldn't make sense, given the fact that Napoleon was a French revolutionary, a lot more akin to what Lemonade Mouth represents. But he mentions that he used to be a rebel in his high school days, so that costume was actually foreshadowing that eventual reveal. That also explains how Stella was so easily able to get the band signed up for the bash through Brennigan, since he does see some of his old self in Stella and would therefore be more likely to acquiesce to her desires. Unlike other heads of schools and DCOMs, I think Brennigan is more reasonable and better acted than most, making him more believable in his role. And now, let's take a look at the 5 ordinary students turned superstars, the main cast that created Lemonade Mouth. Charlie is a dorky, somewhat clueless, kind of awkward, but well-meaning and genuinely nice guy. Blake Michael does a great job here understanding the nuances of who his character is supposed to be, since all of his interactions are pretty believable. It's also a pretty great piece of film to intentionally downplay his feelings for Mo, even though we already know them from the get-go because of how he reacts to certain things that she says or does. Most of that is sold through body language and not spoken language, which works well with his character. The whole perfect brother comparison is a relatively plain one, but Charlie isn't meant to be a highly complex character in terms of his family relations, so his problems are resolved with relative ease when his brother returns. Mo is going through something similar to Charlie with the fact that her dad is trying to raise her to be his idea of this perfect Indian girl. Since Charlie did have feelings for Mo, it makes sense that their characters would have somewhat parallel arcs. The gradual change from being half of herself to realizing that she needed to be all of her was well executed. It was never just her out of nowhere becoming this completely different person. It was well paced to where she was slowly doing things and seeing things differently as it pertained to the other Lemonade Mouth members, Scott, and most importantly, her dad. The conversation she had with her dad was a difficult one, and one that many can relate to, and it's handled really well. Naomi Scott does a solid job here. Her performance acting-wise isn't as subtle as the previous 2 we discussed, but it more than gets the job done for what her character had to overcome and accomplish. Wen's character is dipped in a bit more intrigue because of one simple fact. His biological mother didn't die, she left. Knowing this allows you to understand where Wen is coming from, in terms of his mistrust of Sydney. It's killing him on the inside that after what he likely had to endure with his real mom, that his dad could so easily love again. The first time you watch this, it's easy to assume that Wen is just being selfish, and maybe he still is to some degree, but he does have his reasons, and none of them have anything to do with Sydney as a person who does try her very best to be close to Wen despite him giving her a hard time. Their eventual resolution was wonderful because of Sydney's reaction to it. Again, body language, not words. The pure relief she felt when it became clear that Wen was finally starting to accept her after a difficult road was the perfect moment to cap off both character arcs. I think Wen is the funniest character out of the group, and has a couple of pretty great moments on that end, as well as an awkward yet functional chemistry with Olivia. He's kind of a little goofy and she's not great at talking, but it works out. Like with the others I've talked about, his performance is solid, but there's a reason that I saved the next 2 for last. Bridget Mendler is flawless in this role. No, seriously, I've seen more movies than I can count that featured Oscar-nominated acting performances, and her character here could legitimately compete with a couple of them. Her portrayal of a very damaged character with a very heavy family history might just be the single greatest acting performance by any actor on any DCOM ever made. The very particular way she speaks during different parts of the film, how she uses body language when the words don't come easily, the raw, believable pain her character goes through, it's all there and then some. This entire movie symbolizes her character arc because it's her telling the story, which she eventually mails to her dad in an attempt to reconnect with him while he's in prison. Every moment that has to matter with Olivia is acted out beautifully by Bridget Mendler, and it's not like she had the luxury of playing a similar character on Good Luck Charlie. We all know how sarcastic and sure of herself Teddy Duncan can be. Olivia as a character is so far removed from anything she's done, and she nails every detail, every nuance, every single feeling, thought, emotion, scene, done well and done right. And even though I don't think Hayley Kiyoko portrays Stella nearly as well, there's a good reason I saved her for last. And finally, Stella, easily the second best acting performance in this movie. From my very brief experience with her other acting roles, portraying Stella wasn't as much of a jump for her, but she still brought her A game. But when it's all said and done, Stella is Lemonade Mouth, both figuratively and literally. Remember when she spit on Ray and that's how they got their band name? That was intentional. Ray was literally calling Stella Lemonade Mouth. Their band represents a revolution, the exact same revolution that Stella talks about starting. Their band represents bringing a voice to the voiceless, and making that same case about standing up and being heard is what got Stella centered attention in the first place. Stella is the revolution. Stella is the voice of the voiceless. Stella is Lemonade Mouth, which is also why it's so fitting that she, for the most part, is the main force behind leading the band. She's the one that texts everyone saying we need to get this started. She's the one that convinced Wen and Olivia to write a song together. She's the one that protested their signature lemonade machine being removed. Remember when the whole band was in a holding cell and everyone places the blame on her? Exactly. It was all Stella's fault because she's the force behind the revolution known as Lemonade Mouth for better and worse. Why is Stella the only one of the main five not injured before Rising Star? Because Lemonade Mouth is an idea, and a wise man once said that ideas are bulletproof. If Lemonade Mouth as a band was its own character, its character arc would be a direct parallel to Stella's, starting in the underground and eventually showing to the world, or your parents, that you can achieve wonders. The scene where Stella and her mom make up, those were real emotions coming from two actors giving it everything they had for this movie, and it's beautiful. Stella is strong-willed, unrelenting, and strives to, in her own words, be more than just some picture in a yearbook, and on all fronts, she succeeded. The cast has no slackers. Everyone came to work and did their jobs, and the final cut of this movie is a testament to that. And that's Lemonade Mouth. So, what's the verdict? Lemonade Mouth is a well-detailed, well-paced, well-thought-out, well-developed narrative that symbolizes the ability of individuals to join together to do incredible things and make their presence known to the world. The soundtrack is exceptional, except for the Mudslide Crush songs that don't fit as cleanly into the story that the songs tell, but, as I mentioned, it's intentional and a genius move. Mudslide Crush songs straight up insult the people listening to them, and nowhere is that more true than for Don't You Wish You Were Us. They actually sing about nobody really liking you that much, and they are talking directly to the crowd, who's eating it up. It's an on-the-nose, but effective metaphor directed towards bad music that becomes popular anyways, and the bloated heads of popular musicians that are way too rich and way too cocky about it. Their music is meant to be meaningless, while Lemonade Mouth's music is inspired by the trials and tribulations of the members involved, mostly Olivia, and that's the whole point. This movie about music wants to remind us that music with true internal meaning to those singing it will always win out at the end of the day, over whoever the pop star of the week happens to be. That's why singers like Adele can come back after what felt like forever and rack up billions of YouTube views, while others fade from the spotlight never to be heard from again. But even without the music, this movie works exceptionally well as a developer of 5, 6 if you count Scott, character arcs. This movie had a lot to do, and unlike Descendants, a good but arguably overambitious movie, Lemonade Mouth accomplished everything it set out to do. This movie literally made only 2 mistakes, the second of which is subjective, the editing during More Than Just a Band, and the convenience of having Mel show up near the end, but other than that, pretty spotless. In fact, this movie was so great at starting and finishing the arcs the characters go through that when plans for Lemonade Mouth 2 arose, they cancelled it because they literally had nowhere else to go, as confirmed by an interview with Bridget Mendler. So, be thankful that there wasn't a sequel, because Teen Beach 2 is still the only DCOM sequel that I actually think functions well, and a Lemonade Mouth 2 would have been a couple good songs, but a mess of a story at the end of the day. This movie is all we ever need from these characters because they got it so very right the first time around in nearly every respect. I asked at the beginning of the video if Lemonade Mouth was worthy of all its praise, and my obvious answer is a resounding yes. Every single Disney fan, whether young or old, needs to not just see this movie, but experience it. I've started seriously thinking about the top 10 all-time greatest DCOMs, and right now, there are only 2 movies guaranteed to be on that list. This is one of them. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, help me out with the likes, subs, and share it all over social media, and don't forget to follow the Disney Brain on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Links down below. Thanks again to every single one of you who helped me achieve this special 50th video milestone, and here's the 50 more. This movie is near and dear to my heart in addition to being a technical masterpiece in its own right, so I hope I've done it justice with this review. I'll be at Anime Boston all weekend, so no videos until probably Monday, but I'll be back soon with the Stuck in the Middle review and more videos to come. Until then...